Get him off my flight, or I will buy this airline just to fire you." Those were the words that echoed through the first-class cabin of Flight 882 to Zurich, a threat screamed by a man who thought his bank account gave him the right to judge a stranger by the color of his skin. He thought he was removing a disturbance. He didn't realize he was sitting next to the only person who could save his company, nor did he know the pilot was listening to every word. What happened next wasn't just a removal. It was a systematic destruction of an empire, broadcast live to the world. Here is the story of how arrogance met the ultimate altitude drop. The recycled air inside the cabin of the Lufthansa Airbus A350 waiting at JFK smelled faintly of expensive leather and conditioned anxiety. For Sterling P. Harrington, CEO of Harrington Global Logistics, the atmosphere was insufficient. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, glancing at his Patek Philippe watch for the third time in 2 minutes. Departure was scheduled for 6:45 p.m. It was now 6:12 p.m. He hated the waiting game. The sterling time wasn't just money. It was the only commodity he couldn't bully into submission. Sterling was a man who had curated his life to eliminate friction. At 52, he had the silver fox hairline of a statesman and the cold, shark-like eyes of a corporate raider. He was currently traveling to Davos for the World Economic Forum, not just to attend, but to secure a merger that would solidify his company as the premier defense contractor for the next decade. He needed everything to be perfect. He needed silence. He needed the first-class cabin to be his personal sanctuary. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, sipping a pre-flight scotch that flight attendant Sarah Jenkins had brought him with trembling hands. Sarah, a 20-year veteran of the skies, knew a problem passenger when she saw one. Sterling hadn't even looked her in the eye when he ordered the drink. He just snapped his fingers and pointed at his tray table. "Another," Sterling muttered as she passed by, extending the empty glass without looking up from his iPad. "Certainly, Mr. Harrington." "We'll be closing the doors shortly," Sarah said, her voice practicing the diplomatic neutrality required of her job. The first-class cabin was mostly empty, a rarity for a flight to Zurich during conference season. Sterling relished the solitude. He had purchased Seat 1A, the prime spot. Seat 1B, directly across the aisle, was empty. He intended to keep it that way. He had actually instructed his assistant, Beatrice, to buy the seat next to him to ensure privacy, but the airline system had flagged the duplicate booking and cancelled it at the last minute due to overbooking regulations. He was still fuming about it. "Boarding is complete for Zone 1, the gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom. "Now inviting Zone 2. Sterling ignored the noise, burying himself in a spreadsheet that detailed the hostile takeover of a smaller rival, Aerotech Systems. He was smiling at a particularly vicious clause in the contract when a shadow fell over his light. He looked up, expecting to see a flight attendant or perhaps a fellow CEO, someone like Richard Branson or a diplomat. Instead, he saw a young black man standing in the aisle, checking his ticket against the row number. The young man, Jamal, looked to be about 22. He was dressed in a gray hoodie that had seen better days, faded denim jeans and scuffed sneakers. A battered canvas backpack hung over one shoulder, and he clutched a worn leather notebook in his hand. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, but there was a quiet intensity in his posture. Sterling's lip curled. "Economy is back that way, kid," he thought, waiting for the boy to realize his mistake and keep walking toward the cattle class in the rear. But Jamal didn't keep walking. He stopped at row 1. He looked at his boarding pass, frowned slightly as if double-checking, and then looked at seat 1B. "Excuse me," Jamal said softly. His voice was deep, polite but firm. He began to stow his backpack in the overhead bin directly above Sterling's head. Sterling physically recoiled, pulling his scotch glass closer to his chest as if the backpack was radioactive. Whoa, easy there," Sterling snapped, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of the engines. "What do you think you're doing?" Jamal paused, the bag halfway into the bin. He looked down at Sterling, confused. "I'm putting my bag up, sir. This is my seat." Sterling let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a dry, ugly sound. "Your seat? You must be joking, or illiterate. Let me see that." He didn't wait for permission. Sterling snatched the boarding pass from Jamal's hand. He scanned it, desperate to find the error, the 34B that his brain insisted must be there. Pass Chrono Washington/Jamal SEET 01B class first. Sterling stared at the ticket. It was legitimate, but it didn't make sense. This kid looked like he should be serving coffee, not sipping champagne. First-class tickets on this flight were going for $12,000. The hoodie the kid was wearing probably cost $12. "There's been a mistake," Sterling declared, shoving the ticket back at Jamal as if it were a used tissue. "A computer glitch. They upgrade people when economy is full, but this is ridiculous. Do you have any idea how much I paid for this seat?" Jamal took the ticket back, smoothing out the crinkles Sterling had made. He remained calm, though a muscle in his jaw tightened. "I don't know what you paid, sir. And it doesn't matter. This is my seat." "It does matter," Sterling hissed, unbuckling his seatbelt and standing up. He was tall, imposing, used to people shrinking away from him. Jamal didn't shrink. He stood his ground, matching Sterling's height. "This cabin is for professionals. For people who need to work. I have sensitive documents out. I cannot have." He gestured vaguely at Jamal's entire existence. "I cannot have you looking over my shoulder." "I have no interest in your documents," Jamal said, finally sliding his bag into the bin and clicking it shut. "I just want to sleep." "Sleep in the back," Sterling spat. He pressed the flight attendant call button, holding it down aggressively until the chimney dinged 4 times in rapid succession. Sarah hurried over, her smile tight. She had been watching the interaction from the galley, praying it wouldn't escalate. Her prayers were unanswered. "Is there a problem, Mr. Harrington?" "Yes, there is a significant problem, Sarah," Sterling said, reading her name tag with a sneer. "There has been a ticketing error. This passenger has wandered into the wrong cabin. Please escort him to his assigned seat in economy so we can depart." Sarah looked at Jamal, then at his ticket. She knew exactly who Jamal was. The manifest had flagged him as a VIP, though not for the reasons Sterling assumed. "Mr. Harrington," Sarah said gently, lowering her voice, "Mr. Washington is in his correct seat. The flight is fully booked and he is assigned to 1B. I don't care what the computer says." Sterling's voice rose, causing heads in rows 2 and 3 to turn. "Look at him. He's obviously a student or something else. He doesn't belong here. I paid full fare. I demand you move him, downgrade him. Give him a voucher. I don't care. Just get him out of my sight." Jamal stood silently. He didn't argue. He didn't shout back. He just watched Sterling with a look that wasn't anger, it was pity. And that pity infuriated Sterling more than any insult could have. "Sir," Sarah said, her tone hardening slightly, "Mr. Washington has every right to be here. Please sit down so we can close the doors." "I will not sit down." Sterling slammed his hand on the partition wall. "Do you know who I am? I am the keynote speaker at the Davos Logistics Summit. I am personal friends with the CEO of this airline. If you don't remove this distraction, I will make one phone call and have your wings stripped before we even land." The air in the cabin went dead silent. The threat hung heavy and toxic. Jamal finally spoke. "Sir, I'm an aerospace engineering doctoral candidate at MIT. I'm tired. I'm not here to bother you. Please just let it go." "MIT?" Sterling scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England. Affirmative action really is out of control if they're handing out first-class seats with the scholarships now." That was the line. The racism wasn't subtle anymore. It was naked and ugly. Sarah's face went pale. She reached for the interphone to call the cockpit. But Sterling grabbed her wrist. "Don't you dare call the captain on me," he growled. "You call the gate agent and get security to remove him." He didn't see the passengers in row 2 pulling out their phones. He didn't see the red recording lights blinking. And he certainly didn't see the look on Jamal Washington's face change from fatigued to a sharp, calculating focus. Jamal looked at Sterling's hand on Sarah's wrist. "Let her go," Jamal said. The softness was gone from his voice. It was the command of someone who knew exactly how much force was required to break a wrist and was hoping he wouldn't have to use it. Sterling released her, sneering. "Fine, get the pilot. Let's see whose side he takes. The billionaire or the charity case?" Sarah rubbed her wrist, her eyes flashing. "I will inform Captain Sullivan immediately." She turned and marched toward the cockpit door. Sterling sat back down, smoothing his suit jacket, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He winked at Jamal. "You're done, kid. Captains don't like delays and money talks." Jamal sat down in seat 1B, buckled his belt, and opened his worn leather notebook. He didn't look at Sterling. He just wrote a single line of text, checked the time, and waited. Sterling had no idea that the man flying the plane, Captain Robert Sullivan, wasn't just a pilot. He was a man who owed Jamal Washington a debt that money couldn't pay. The cockpit of the Airbus A350 was a sanctuary of cool logic and glowing screens, a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere of the first-class cabin. Captain Robert Sullivan was running through the pre-flight checklist with his first officer, David Chen. Sully was a legend in the aviation worlds. 60 years old, with the kind of gray hair that inspired confidence and a voice that could calm a turbulence-shaken cabin in seconds. He was formerly a test pilot for the Air Force, a man who had flown experimental craft that wanted to kill him and survived. "Flaps set to 2, David called out. "Check," Sully responded, toggling the switch. The interphone chimed. It wasn't the usual ready for departure chime. It was the emergency priority code. Sully frowned and picked up the handset. "Deck." "Go ahead." "Captain, it's Sarah. We have a situation in first." Her voice was shaking. Sarah never shook. Sully turned in his seat. "Medical." "No, sir. Security. Verbal abuse, physical intimidation, and refusal to comply." Seat 1A. "Mr. Sterling Harrington." Sully narrowed his eyes. He knew the name. Everyone in aviation knew the name Harrington. His logistics company shipped parts for half the commercial fleets in the world. He was a VIP, a global services member, the kind of passenger airlines bent over backwards to please. "What's the issue, Sarah?" "He's demanding the removal of the passenger in 1B. He's being incredibly racist, Captain. He grabbed my wrist when I tried to call you. He claims the passenger is a security threat because of how he looks." Sully's grip on the handset tightened. "Who was in 1B? There was a pause on the line. "It's him, Captain. It's Jamal." Sully froze. The ambient hum of the avionics fans seemed to fade away. Jamal. 2 years ago, Sully had been a guest lecturer at an aviation safety conference in Chicago. During a breakout session, a ceiling fixture, heavy industrial lighting rig had given way directly above where Sully was standing. He hadn't seen it, but a young undergraduate volunteer had. The kid had tackled Sully, knocking him clear just as 500 pounds of steel crashed into the podium. The kid took a piece of shrapnel to the leg that ended his track scholarship, but he saved Sully's life. That kid was Jamal Washington. Sully had tried to pay him, tried to help, but Jamal had refused everything except a letter of recommendation for his PhD application. This flight, this seat, was Sully's doing. He had pulled strings to get Jamal flown out to Zurich to meet with the head of the European Space Agency, a meeting that could launch Jamal's career. "Did you say Harrington grabbed you?" Sully asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous low frequency. "Yes, Captain. And he's demanding Jamal be removed?" "Yes. Yes, he says, and I quote, 'Money talks.'" Sully looked out the windshield at the rainy tarmac of JFK. He looked at the fuel gauges. He looked at the fasten seatbelt sign. Then he looked at David. "David, keep the parking brake set. Inform ground we are holding for a security issue." "You got it, Skipper," David said, sensing the shift in the captain's demeanor. Sully stood up. He adjusted his tie. He put on his cap, pulling the brim low. "Sarah," Sully said into the phone, "don't engage with him further. I'm coming back there. Captain, he's very agitated. He's threatening to buy the airline." "Let him try," Sully said. "I'm going to have a chat with Mr. Harrington." Back in the cabin, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Sterling was now on his phone, loudly berating an assistant on the other end. "I don't care what time it is in New York, Beatrice. Get the VP of Customer Relations on the phone now. I'm sitting next to a thug in a hoodie and the flight attendant is incompetent." Jamal remained still. He had his textbook open, Advanced Fluid Dynamics and Propulsion Systems, but he wasn't reading. He was breathing deeply, controlling his heart rate. He knew exactly what men like Sterling wanted. They wanted a reaction. They wanted the angry black man narrative so they could justify their fear. Jamal refused to give it to him. "You're ignoring me," Sterling sneered, hanging up the phone. "That's smart. Keep your mouth shut and maybe the police will go easy on you when they drag you off." Mr. Harrington," Jamal said, turning to face him. "I designed the variable sweep wing latches that your company just patented last month. I did the freelance CAD work for Aerotech before you acquired them." Sterling blinked. The specific detail caught him off guard. But his ego was a runaway train. It couldn't stop. "You're a liar," Sterling spat. "You're a lying kid trying to sound smart. You probably stole that info from a trash can." The curtain between the galley and first class whipped open. The cabin went silent. Captain Sullivan stepped through. He wasn't a small man, and in his uniform, with the 4 gold stripes on his shoulders and the grim set of his jaw, he looked like absolute authority personified. Sterling smiled. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up to greet the captain, assuming this was his victory lap. "Captain," Sterling boomed, extending a hand. "Finally, some competence. I trust Sarah told you about the situation. I want this passenger removed immediately so we can—" Sully ignored the hand. He didn't even look at it. He stepped into Sterling's personal space, forcing the CEO to take a half step back. "Mr. Harrington," Sully said, his voice calm but projecting to every row in the cabin, "you are delaying my aircraft." "I am delaying." Sterling laughed, gesturing at Jamal. No. He is the delay. He is a security risk. He doesn't belong in this cabin. I demand you remove him." Sully looked at Jamal. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a soldier's greeting. Jamal nodded back, relief washing over his face. Sully turned back to Sterling. "Mr. Washington's a distinguished guest of this airline. He is exactly where he is supposed to be." Sterling's face turned a shade of violent red. "Distinguished? He's wearing a hoodie. I am a Platinum Global partner. I spend $3 million a year with this airline. You are choosing him over me. I am choosing safety and order over arrogance," Sully said. "You touched a member of my flight crew. You have created a disturbance that is threatening the safety of this flight. Under federal law, that makes you the security threat." "You can't be serious," Sterling sputtered. "Do you know who I am? I can end your career. I will have you flying cargo planes to Antarctica." "Right." "Oh, sir," Sully said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "I flew sorties over Baghdad while you were inheriting your father's money. I don't scare easily. Now, you have 2 choices." Sully held up 2 fingers. "1, you sit down, you shut up, and you do not say one more word to Mr. Washington or my crew for the duration of this flight. You will not look at them. You will not speak to them." Sterling opened his mouth to object, but Sully cut him off. 2, You grab your bag and you get off my plane. And if you choose option 2, I will have the Port Authority waiting at the jet bridge to arrest you for assault on a flight crew member." The first-class cabin held its collective breath. The passengers in row 2 were filming everything. The red lights on the phones were steady eyes watching the fall of a Titan. Sterling Harrington looked at the captain. He looked at Jamal, who was calmly watching him. He looked at the open cabin door. His pride was a physical weight in his chest, burning and heavy. He couldn't leave the meeting, and Davos was too important. He had to be on this plane. "Fine," Sterling hissed, sitting down and aggressively buckling his belt. "But you will hear from my lawyers. And you," he pointed a shaking finger at Jamal, "don't think you've won." Sully stared at him for 3 full seconds, ensuring the dominance was established. "One more word, Mr. Harrington. Just one." Sully turned to Sarah. "Is everyone else seated?" "Yes, Captain." "Good. Let's go to Zurich." Sully returned to the cockpit. The door clicked shut and locked. Sterling sat fuming, vibrating with rage. He pulled out his laptop and began typing furiously, drafting an email to the airline's board of directors. He was going to destroy the pilot. He was going to destroy the flight attendant. That he was going to find out who this Jamal kid was and make sure he never worked in engineering or anywhere else ever again. But Sterling didn't know that the hard karma wasn't waiting for him in Zurich. It was waiting for him right now on the in-flight Wi-Fi. Because the passenger in 2A, a quiet woman with thick glasses, wasn't just a tourist. She was the senior vice president of ethics for the European Union's Trade Commission, the very regulatory body Sterling needed approval from for his merger, and she had recorded the entire thing. The Airbus A350 leveled off at its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, the seatbelt signs dinging off with a polite chime that felt mockery of the tension in the cabin. The silence in first class was not peaceful, it was pressurized. It was the heavy, thick silence of a courtroom just before a verdict is read. For the next 7 hours, Sterling Harrington was trapped in an aluminum tube traveling at Mach 0.85 with the 3 people he currently hated most in the world: the defiant pilot, the insubordinate flight attendant, and the young black man whose mere presence had disrupted Sterling's carefully curated reality. Sterling was not a man capable of introspection. When faced with an obstacle, his default setting was attack. Captain Sullivan had temporarily neutralized his ability to attack physically or verbally, so Sterling turned to his most potent weapon, his network. He aggressively connected his laptop to the in-flight S8TM Wi-Fi, paying the exorbitant $40 fee without blinking. The internet connection over the Atlantic was slow and latent, the little loading wheel spinning with agonizing lethargy, mirroring Sterling's mounting impatience. He opened his secure email client. His first message was to Michael the Hammer Rossi, his fixer and lead counsel in New York. Rossi was the kind of lawyer you hired not to interpret the law, but to bury your opponents under it. Subject: urgent, F-flight incident. De-destroy them. Michael: I'm on LX82 to Zurich. Had an issue with an uppity crew and a disruptive passenger. The airline insisted on seating in first. Captain Robert Sullivan threatened Emmy with arrest. Get everything on him. Did he drink before the flight? Marital problems? Debts? I want his medical records. I want him grounded by tomorrow. Also find out who a Jamal Washington is. Claims to be MIT. Verify and find the dirt. I want his scholarship revoked. I want him untouchable. This is priority alpha. Speech disc. Sterling hit send with a vindictive stab of his finger. He felt a modicum of control return. This was how the world worked. You didn't fight in the aisle. You fought from the boardroom, using lawyers as assassins. He glanced sideways at seat 1B. Jamal had ordered a ginger ale and was sipping it while reading. The condensation on the glass was the only movement in his stillness. Jamal's ability to compartmentalize the previous hour's insanity was infuriating to Sterling. The kid should have been cowering, apologetic, or at least visibly shaken. Instead, he was studying fluid dynamics. Sterling couldn't help himself. The captain's orders be damned, he needed to exert some dominance. He cleared his throat loudly, a harsh, guttural sound in the quiet cabin. He leaned slightly toward the aisle, speaking into the space between them without making direct eye contact. "Enjoying the free soda, kid? Don't get used to it. Real life doesn't hand out free rides once you leave the campus bubble." Jamal didn't immediately react. He finished a paragraph, marked the page with a slender metal bookmark, and slowly turned his head. His eyes were incredibly calm, possessing a depth that unsettled Sterling. "Mr. Harrington," Jamal said, his voice low so as not to carry to the galley. "I'm calculating the Reynolds number for a boundary layer transition prototype I'm presenting in Zurich. If my calculations are correct, the fuel efficiency gains could save the logistics industry billions over the next decade." Jamal paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. "I'm not getting a free ride, sir. I'm building the engine that will carry people like you in the future. Now, if you'll excuse me, the math requires focus." Jamal turned back to his book. It was a dismissal. A polite, intellectual, absolute dismissal. Sterling's jaw worked silently. He felt heat rush up his neck. He had just been patronized by a 22-year-old in a hoodie, and the worst part was he didn't entirely understand what the kid had just said. Reynolds number, boundary layer. It sounded expensive, and it sounded real. Across the aisle in seat 2A, Dr. Evelyn Reed adjusted her reading glasses. She was a slight woman in her late 50s with a severe bob haircut and an unassuming demeanor that masked one of the sharpest legal minds in Brussels. As the SVP of Ethics for the European Trade Commission, her job was to identify corruption, bias, and moral failings in corporate structures trying to do business in the EU. She had seen many men like Sterling Harrington. They were usually adept at hiding their true nature behind polished PR statements and charitable donations. But today the mask had slipped completely. Evelyn looked down at her iPhone, hidden beneath a silk scarf on her lap. The video was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. The audio was crystal clear. Every slur, every threat to the flight attendant, the captain's masterful dressing down of the billionaire, it was all there. She had initially thought to send it to the airline's internal review board. But after witnessing Sterling's continued aggression, his inability to accept defeat, she realized an internal review wouldn't be enough. Men like Harrington didn't fear rules. They bought the people who made them. They only feared one thing: public exposure. Evelyn opened a secure messaging app, Signal. She scrolled to a contact listed simply as J. Campbell, NYT. Jerome Campbell was a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist specializing in corporate malfeasance. She typed a brief message: "Jerome, I'm on a flight with Sterling Harrington. You need to see this. It's not just bad behavior. It's a worldview. He's trying to merge with Aerotech. The EU Commission needs to see this before we vote." She attached the video file. The upload progress bar appeared. The in-flight Wi-Fi was slow, 2%, 5%. Evan watched the percentage climb. With every percent, the sword hanging over Sterling Harrington's unsuspecting head lowered an inch. He was busy trying to destroy a pilot and a student, completely unaware that his own destruction was currently buffering at 30,000 feet over the mid-Atlantic ridge. The cabin lights dimmed for the overnight portion of the flight. Sterling slammed his laptop shut, unable to focus. He reclined his seat aggressively, invading the space behind him, and squeezed his eyes shut, trying to force sleep that wouldn't come. He was vibrating with an impotent rage that demanded a target. He didn't know that the target had already been acquired, and the shot was in the air. Jerome Campbell was awake at 3:15 a.m. in his Brooklyn brownstone, nursing a lukewarm coffee and chasing a dead-end lead on pharmaceutical price-fixing when his phone buzzed. A signal message from Evelyn Reed was rare. A message from Evelyn Reed with a video attachment at this hour was an alarm bell. He downloaded the file. He watched it once, his eyebrows climbing higher with every second. He watched it a second time, taking notes. Holy hell, Jerome whispered to his empty kitchen. It was perfect. It was horrifyingly perfect. Sterling Harrington, the man currently on the cover of Forbes, touted as a visionary of modern supply chains, caught in 4K resolution, acting like a segregationist tycoon from the 1950s. Jerome knew the context. He knew about the Davos trip. He knew about the massive defense merger Harrington was trying to push through, a merger that critics said would create a dangerous monopoly. This video wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. It was geopolitical dynamite. Jerome didn't hesitate. He didn't need to call Harrington for a comment. The video was the comment. He drafted a short, punchy tweet, tagged the New York Times, tagged Harrington Global's official account, and attached the video. At Jerome Campbell NYT, Sterling Harrington, CEO of Harrington Global, demonstrates his leadership style on flight to Davos. Demands removal of black MIT doctoral student from first class. Threatens crew. The mast slips. Watch. He hit post. The digital world is a dry forest waiting for a match. This video was a flamethrower. At 3:30 a.m. Eastern, the view count was at 500. By 3:45 a.m., it was at 25,000. Retweets from major activists and early bird news aggregators started the exponential curve. The algorithm noticed the sudden surge in engagement around the keywords Harrington, racist, and the airline's name. It began pushing the content onto everyone's For You page. By 4:15 a.m., the video had breached the containment of crypto Twitter and political Twitter and entered the mainstream zeitgeist. The hashtag Flight8822 began to trend globally. In the suburbs of Connecticut, Karen Davies, the vice president of communications for Harrington Global Logistics, was woken up by the nuclear option ringtone she had assigned to her crisis monitoring service. She fumbled for her glasses, her heart hammering. A notification from her service read, "Alert, Sterling Harrington mentioned in viral video. Sentiment, negative, extreme. Breached 2.1 million and climbing." Karen clicked the link. She watched 10 seconds of Sterling berating Sarah about the pilot before she felt physically ill. "Oh, Sterling, you absolute idiot," she moaned, rolling out of bed. She immediately tried to call him. Straight to voicemail. He was over the Atlantic. He was unreachable, the perfect storm. Karen fired off texts to the crisis management team, initiating Protocol Omega. They needed to bury this, spin it, deny it, claim it was a deep fake, anything. But deep down, Karen knew you couldn't spin this. The clarity of the video, the undeniable ugliness of his tonnage was bulletproof. By 5 a.m. in New York, the European markets were opening. In Zurich, Johann Weber, the chairman of Aerotech Systems, the company Sterling was flying to acquire, checked his morning briefing over espresso. The first item was not market data. It was a link sent by his own ethics compliance officer. Weber watched the video. His face hardened. Aerotech was a company built on precision and futuristic engineering. Their staff was deeply diverse. A merger with Harrington had already been unpopular internally. This would cause a revolt. More importantly, the European Trade Commission had to approve the deal. Weber knew Evelyn Reed was on that very flight. If she had seen this, the deal was dead in the water. Weber picked up his phone and called his lead negotiator. "Suspend the talks with Harrington." "Yes, I know he's in the air when he lands. Tell him the meeting is cancelled. The merger is on indefinite hold pending an investigation into cultural incompatibility." Back on Flight 882, the cabin was still dark and quiet. They were 3 hours from Zurich. Sterling had finally managed to drift into a shallow, angry sleep. He was jolted awake by a sudden, violent vibration against his thigh. He groggily pulled his phone from his pocket. It was hot. He had forgotten to turn off the cellular data roaming, and although he had no signal for calls, his phone had momentarily connected to a passing satellite handshake, just long enough for his notification stack to explode. 74 missed calls, 412 texts. His lock screen was a blur of panic. Corin Davies, Sterling, do not speak to anyone when you land. Call me immediately. Tis bad. Board member Jenkins, what the hell is this video, Sterling? The stock is down 8% pre-market. Michael Rossi, lawyer, we have a major containment breach. It's everywhere. Who filmed this? Sterling stared at the phone, his sleep-addled brain trying to process the deluge. What video? He unlocked his phone. His Twitter app, which he rarely used, was open. His own name was trending #1 worldwide. He clicked the hashtag. The top post was from Jerome Campbell, and there was his own face, purple with rage, shouting at Sarah. Do you know who I am? I can end your career. The blood drained from Sterling's face, leaving him nauseous. He looked up wildly. He scanned the darkened cabin. Who? Where? Where? His eyes darted to row 2. The quiet woman with the bob haircut was awake. She wasn't looking at a screen. She was looking directly at him, her expression unreadable, calm, and devastatingly clinical. Sterling felt the walls of the Airbus A350 closing in on him. He was 30,000 feet in the air, and his life was burning to the ground below him. He looked at Jamal sleeping peacefully in 1B. The kid hadn't done a thing. He hadn't lifted a finger. And yet he had won. Sterling desperately tried to refresh his email to respond to Karen to do something. No connects through calm. The Wi-Fi had cut out. He was completely alone, trapped in the sky with his actions, while the world below sharpened its knives. The silence in the cabin was no longer pressurized. It was suffocating. The descent into Zurich is usually one of the most scenic approaches in aviation, offering breathtaking views of the Alps and the pristine expanse of Lake Zurich. But for Sterling Harrington, the window seat offered no comfort. The view outside was gray and turbulent, mirroring the internal collapse of his world. For the last 3 hours of the flight, Sterling had been cut off from the digital lifeline. The Wi-Fi had never reconnected, deliberate act, he suspected, by the cockpit. He sat in a silence that was louder than screaming. He watched Jamal Washington sleep. He watched the flight attendant Sarah studiously ignore him, serving tea to Dr. Reed in 2A with a warmth that vanished the second she looked in Sterling's direction. As the plane banked for its final approach, the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated with a heavy thud. Then the intercom crackled to life. It wasn't the first officer giving the weather. It was Captain Sullivan. His voice was no longer the soothing baritone of a commercial pilot. It was the steel-edged voice of a commander. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sullivan from the flight deck. We are beginning our final approach into Zurich. The weather is overcast, 8 degrees Celsius. We expect to be on the ground in 15 minutes. There was a pause. A static hiss filled the cabin. I want to take a moment to offer a special apology to the passengers in the first-class cabin. You were subjected to a disturbance today that does not reflect the values of this airline, nor the decency we expect from civilized society. Aviation is a privilege. It connects worlds. It is not a place for bigotry or entitlement. Sterling stiffened, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. The captain was doing this. He was actually doing this publicly. We have a very special guest on board today in seat 1B, Sully continued, his voice swelling with pride. Mr. Jamal Washington, a future doctor of aerospace engineering from MIT. I would like to personally thank Mr. Karai Washington for his patience, his dignity, and for the work he is doing to make the skies safer for all of us, even for those who do not appreciate it. Jamal, it is an honor to fly you. A few passengers in the business class section behind the curtain who had heard the rumors of the altercation started to clap. Then Dr. Reed in 2A clapped. Sarah, standing in the galley, clapped. Sterling felt the applause like physical blows. He wanted to stand up and shout, to remind them of his net worth, to threaten lawsuits. The plane was tilting, the gravity pushing him down into the seat he had paid $12,000 for, trapping him. As for the disruption, Sully's voice turned cold. I have alerted ground authorities. We will be met at the gate. Please remain seated until the authorities have boarded and removed the security risk. Thank you. The intercom clicked off. Sterling smirked. The security risk. Finally, the pilot had come to his senses. He had called the police to remove the boy. It was a standard procedure: appease the mob with a speech, then follow the money when the wheels hit the tarmac. Sullivan was smart. He knew he couldn't actually arrest a billionaire. He was probably putting on a show for the passengers and would apologize to Sterling privately once the doors opened. "You hear that, kid?" Sterling whispered, leaning toward the aisle as the landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan. "Authorities, that means you. Enjoy your walk to the immigration holding cell." Jamal opened his eyes. He didn't look scared. He looked at Sterling with a profound sadness. "Mr. Harrington," Jamal said softly, "I really hope you find some peace one day, because where you're going, money won't buy it." Nolla, the bog, the full pounced, and the wheels slammed onto the runway. The reverse thrusters roared, slowing the massive beast of a plane. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, Sterling saw the flashing blue lights. 3 Swiss police vehicles, 2 airport security SUVs, and a black sedan with diplomatic plates. "Overkill for a student," Sterling muttered, adjusting his tie. "But I appreciate the efficiency." The plane came to a halt at the gate. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Sterling immediately unbuckled, grabbed his briefcase, and stood up, blocking the aisle so Jamal couldn't move. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated," Sarah announced, her voice ringing clear. "Do not open the overhead bins." The cabin door opened. The cool Swiss air rushed in. 3 officers from the Kantonspolizei boarded. They were large, stern men with submachine guns slung across their chests. Behind them walked a man in a sharp suit, the airport duty manager. Sterling stepped forward, flashing his most charming corporate smile. "Officers," Sterling said, gesturing back at seat 1B. "Thank you for coming. The young man is right there. I have his ticket info if you need to file the report for fraud and flight disturbance." The lead officer, a giant of the man named Sergeant Mudabullah, looked at Sterling. He didn't blink. "Are you Sterling P. Harrington?" Muller asked. "I am," Sterling said, puffing out his chest. "CEO of Harrington Global. I am the victim here." Muller nodded to his partners. "Mr. Harrington, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Sterling froze. His brain couldn't process the syntax. "Excuse me? You are under arrest for the assault of a flight crew member, interference with flight crew duties, and breach of the peace under Swiss Aviation Authority Article 44. Turn around, now. Now." "This is a mistake," Sterling shrieked, his voice cracking. "I am an American citizen. I am a billionaire." "That pilot is lying. The black kiddies the threat. The only threat reported by the captain and witnessed by the crew is you," Myler said. He grabbed Sterling's arm, the same arm Sterling had used to grab Sarah, and twisted it behind his back with practiced efficiency. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. As Sterling was shoved forward, stumbling down the aisle of the first-class cabin, he looked desperately at the other passengers for help. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood up from seat 2A. She blocked his path for a split second. "You!" Sterling gasped. "You saw it. Tell them." "I just wanted quiet." Evelyn adjusted her glasses. She looked at the police officer. "Sergeant, I'm Evelyn Reed, Senior Vice President of the European Trade Commission. I have digital evidence of the assault and the hate speech used by this man. I will be forwarding it to your prosecutor immediately." She turned her cold gaze to Sterling. "And Mr. Harrington, regarding the Aerotech merger, don't bother showing up to the meeting and flagging Harrington Global for an immediate ethics audit. You're done in Europe." Sterling's knees buckled. The officers had to physically drag him the rest of the way. As he was hauled off the jet bridge, kicking and screaming about lawyers, the rest of the cabin remained silent. Then Jamal Washington stood up. He gathered his backpack. He picked up his worn notebook. He looked at Sarah. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Jamal said to her. Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes. "Go get him, Jamal." The walk from the aircraft to the terminal is usually a blur of fatigue. For Jamal, it was a surreal dream. He walked out of the jet bridge, not into a holding cell, but into a reception area. Standing there, flanked by two assistants, was Dr. Heinrich Albers, the director of the European Space Agency. Dr. Albers was a legend. He was the man Jamal had quoted in his undergraduate thesis, and he was standing there holding a sign that said, "Welcome, Mr. Washington." Jamal stopped, stunned. "Dr. Albers?" The older man smiled and extended a hand. "Captain Sullivan radioed ahead. He told us there was a brilliant mind on board who needed a proper welcome, and that he might have had a rough flight." Jamal shook the hand, speechless. "We saw the video, Jamal," Albers said quietly, his face serious. "It's already on the news in the lounge. What that man did was unforgivable. But the way you handled it, that showed character. We can teach engineering, son. We cannot teach character. That you already have." Albers put a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "My driver is outside. We have a lot to discuss about those boundary layer transitions you're working on. Aerotech Systems is looking for a new partner now that their previous merger plans have imploded." As they walked through the terminal, they passed a wall of glass overlooking the tarmac. Below, on the wet concrete, Jamal saw a scene that would stay with him forever. Sterling Harrington was being shoved into the back of a police van. His bespoke suit was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and he was screaming at a lawyer who wasn't there. The flashing blue lights illuminated his fall from grace in strobing intervals. Jamal didn't laugh. He didn't gloat. He just watched for a moment, then turned his back on the chaos. "Ready to get to work, Dr. Albers?" Jamal asked. "Ready when you are, Mr. Washington." Karma, much like physics, adheres to the third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Sterling Harrington had pushed the world with malice, and the world pushed back with devastating force. The video from Flight 882 became the most watched clip in the history of Twitter, now X, for the year 2024. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a cultural event. The reaction: within 24 hours of Sterling's arrest in Zurich, Harrington Global Logistics stock plummeted by 22%, wiping out $4 billion in market value. The board of directors, terrified of the PR radioactive fallout, held an emergency midnight session. They didn't just fire Sterling, they erased him. They invoked a moral turpitude clause in his contract that stripped him of his severance package, a package worth $60 million. He left the company he built with nothing but his legal fees. The legal battle. The Swiss do not play games with aviation safety. Sterling was charged with endangering a flight and assault. While his high-priced lawyers managed to keep him out of a Swiss prison, he was deported and banned from entering the European Union for 10 years. This ban was the final nail in his career. A logistics CEO who cannot enter Europe is useless. He was blacklisted by every major airline. The man who once demanded the removal of a passenger was now on the no-fly list of the entire Star Alliance. The twist of fate. 3 years later, Jamal Washington had finished his PhD. His dissertation on variable sweep wing efficiency in subsonic freight revolutionized the industry. He didn't just get a job, he founded his own consultancy firm, Washington Dynamics. His first major client was the newly rebranded Global Logistics Corp., formerly Harrington Global. They were desperate to modernize their fleet to meet new EU emission standards drafted by none other than Dr. Evelyn Reed. To save the company from bankruptcy, the new CEO had to license Jamal's technology. The contract was signed in Boston. Jamal sat at the head of the table wearing a sharp-tailored suit, though he still carried his battered leather notebook. Across the table sat the legal team for the logistics company, and sitting in the corner looking gray, thin, and tired was a consultant the old board had kept on for historical knowledge of the legacy systems. It was Sterling. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was a contractor, a freelancer. He had lost his mansion in the divorce that followed the scandal. He was working to pay off debts. When the contract was placed on the table, it required 2 signatures. Jamal signed his name with a flourish. He pushed the paper across the table. Sterling had to sign as the witnessing consultant. His hand shook. He looked up at Jamal. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He recognized the man he had tried to kick off the plane. He realized that the royalties from this deal money that would go into Jamal's pocket were the only thing keeping his meager consulting paycheck coming. "Mr. Harrington," Jamal said, his voice kind but firm, "please ensure the pen works. I wouldn't want a technical error to delay us." Sterling looked down. He signed the paper. The pilot, Captain Sully Sullivan, retired 2 years later. His final flight was a celebration. The water cannon salute at JFK was massive. As he walked off the plane, he was greeted by his family and by a young man in a suit holding a bottle of vintage champagne. "To the best pilot in the sky," Jamal said, handing him the bottle. "To the best engineer on the ground," Sully replied, hugging him. They remained friends for the rest of their lives. Sterling Harrington remains in a small apartment in New Jersey. He takes the bus to work. Every time he sees a plane fly overhead, he looks down, unable to bear the reminder of the altitude he lost because he couldn't see the humanity in the seat next to him. Karma acts like a boomerang. The harder you throw it, the harder it hits you on the return. Sterling Harrington thought his wealth made him bulletproof, but he forgot that on an airplane everyone breathes the same air, and gravity applies to everyone equally. He tried to crush a student and ended up financing the very future that replaced him. It costs nothing to be kind, but arrogance can cost you everything. What would you have done if you were in the captain's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story of instant justice and rising from the ashes, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that character counts, and subscribe to our channel for more stories where the good guys win and the bad guys get exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching.